Welcome back to another episode of Straight Talking Leadership with me, Chris Piankowski. My guest today is JL Heather, and I'm going to jump in and introduce him before we get into our conversation. JL has spent the past 20 years working in organizational transformations and has discovered the number one path to real change and improvement is through helping leaders rise to the challenge of their role. For the last 5 years, JL has been working with senior and executive leaders at companies like VML, Ford, Pfizer, Wendy's, T-Mobile, GE, and many others doing just that. JL, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate the intro.
You got it. So one thing that I always do at the beginning of a show is a warm-up that I call the Mad Minute. And the Mad Minute has absolutely nothing to do with leadership. It's a couple questions that really just stimulate that gray matter between our ears and get us ready for a fun and productive conversation.
Awesome.
Are you ready for the Mad Minute?
As ready as anyone can be, I'm sure.
There you go. So question number one, what is your favorite breakfast food?
I tend, when I'm not worried about my weight, which, who isn't these days, it's pancakes. Just good old fashioned pancakes with maple syrup.
That you hit the nail on the head with me. My grandma taught me how to make pancakes when I was a little kid, been making them ever since. And now my oldest son, who's 18, he and I have pancake making contests. And
Nice.
We have people over. We're doing a contest, blind taste test, whose pancakes are the best. He actually beat me. So he's got one up on me at this point. So he's
nice.
He's perfecting his craft.
Sounds like you're raising him right.
Yeah, for sure. Second question. If you could transform any animal into the size of an elephant, what animal would you pick?
Ooh, any animal into the size of an elephant. My goodness. Like the only things that come to mind are the ones that would be absolutely terrifying, like, I don't know, a rat or something like that. And I would never do that. Honestly, I don't know that any animal needs to be that big other than elephants. I guess the safest answer here is our dog Harper, who's a mini golden doodle, 40-pound, sweetest dog ever. Like you hold out a treat and she's just like barely takes it, like super gentle. I think that'd be the safest answer right now.
There you go. I think even just from a comedic standpoint, seeing certain animals the size of an elephant would be hilarious. But
ooh, I got one. Have you ever heard of the pistol shrimp?
What's that?
Have you ever heard of the pistol shrimp?
No.
All right. They're little shrimp and they snap their claw closed so hard it creates like a superheated like bubble and that's how they you want to talk about something like crazy to make the size of an elephant. I don't even know what that would do at that point, but I think that's probably the most interesting animal I know of that would be kind of interesting to see what it would do when it's bigger. So there we go. It's at least a unique answer.
All right. Awesome. So look, thanks for playing along with the Mad Minute. Like I said, that's just our warm up. And now topic at hand is talking about leadership. The whole purpose of this show is to share leadership knowledge, lessons, nuggets with people that they're able to take it back into their lives and put it to work right away. So, one of the things that you and I have talked about, and it was kind of in the intro, is, inspiring people to really rise to the challenge of their role. So as you're working with leaders, as you've come up in your career, what are some things that you've done that you've seen work well, that you've seen not work so well in terms of inspiring others that, the viewers and the listeners could take advantage of?
I think, when you're talking about inspiration, there's a couple things to think about before we dive into the meat of the answer there. One, we tend to look at inspiration as this binary state. You're either inspired or you're not, right? And I think for leaders, it's important to realize there's kind of a hierarchy of inspiration. At the bottom end of that is really just the simple act of setting expectations, right? And then there's purpose, and then there's inspiration, aspirational kind of stuff. The other thing that's really important to consider is why this is important for leaders. What is the skin they have in the game for this inspiration moment for themselves and for their people. And I think it's interesting. The Workforce Institute did a survey. This was a little while ago, and I think they've done some updates, but they talked to 3,400 people around the world. And there are some interesting statistics that came out of it. And I've got them all here if you're interested, but some that really jumped out at me. The big one, 60% of people say that their job is the biggest factor influencing their mental health. And that would be 69% of them are saying that's more than their spouse.
Wow.
51 and 41% respectively say that impact is more than their doctor or their therapist. And that tells me leaders have a lot of room to grow. Mm-hmm. And 41% of people need a new therapist. Just to throw that out there.
Yes.
But it's to the point now, 81% of people will say they will prioritize mental health over pay.
Yep.
Right.
I've heard that.
When we're thinking about this idea of inspiration, of giving people a purpose, a lot of it rolls right into that mental health conversation, because we can be a lot happier when we know the work we're doing matters. And that's true for leaders too, because what a lot of people don't realize, that same study, and this is the part that's not quoted nearly as often, 60% of senior leadership are also saying that they are always or often burnt out.
Yeah.
33% of C-level leaders say they don't want to work anymore. And 40% of the C-suite say they will likely quit within the year because of work-related issues, leadership issues.
Wow. So I want to unpack some of those numbers. Because, and maybe I didn't hear you right, but your first statistic, was it that 60% of people find inspiration from their jobs, or they are not inspired by their jobs?
So 60% of people say the biggest factor in their mental health is their work.
Biggest factor of mental health is their work. Okay.
Right. So the thing that determines their mental health more than anything else is their work. So what we're saying there is there's a lot of value in this idea of inspiration, purpose, even just expectation. Mm-hmm. Because I think so many leaders fall down on it. The number of times, and this is kind of the opposite of your question, like, what do I see that doesn't work? So many times the conflict that comes up, the gap that forms, is because the expectation was never set.
Yes.
Right.
And expectations are so huge.
Absolutely.
Both from a setting and a buy-in, and like, what I'm doing and the expectations that, my leader has set for me really match. So now I'm bought in. Now I can take on that level of accountability because I feel like I've got skin in the game.
Right.
When those expectations are mismatched, then oftentimes it leads to frustration and absolutely burnout, because you don't know, you're walking in one direction, but you're expected to be over here. And when that's not clear to you, you get to a certain point and you're like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah. And that has an impact on your view of yourself.
Yeah.
So that, like, there's this concept called the Pygmalion effect, which that's a little bit of a mouthful, but it's this idea that we have this self-image, right? These beliefs about ourselves that drive the way we interact with others, which that in turn drives how those others see us, which then influences how they interact with us, which reinforces how we see ourselves, and around it goes, right?
Yes.
So that's the other thing for leaders to consider, is you have a lot of control in that cycle through expectations, because now you can start influencing how your interactions with that person are affecting their view of themselves, which will change their behavior and come back around. So you can create that self-reinforcing cycle. Mm-hmm. And there's a really great example, and this is a story I love to tell because it's just fascinating to me. It's this guy, what's his name? Alfred Oberlander. So there's another, I'm giving you some great words for a mouthful of words here. And this was back in 1961, and he had a sales team at Metropolitan Life Insurance Company, of all places. And what he did is he split his sales team up into a group of the highest performers, a group of the middle performers, and a group of the lowest performers, right? And I'm curious, like, from your perspective, like, what would you expect in that situation?
I would expect kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy of how each of those groups perform, knowing that I'm in the group of the low performers, mid-range, and high performers.
Yeah. And even there, like the way you said it, most people will say the same thing, self-fulfilling prophecy, which is another term for the Pygmalion effect, right? The expectations we set are going to drive the performance of those groups. Now, the reality is a little different, right? So the top performers, yeah, they were blowing it out of the water. They were doing fantastic. The low performers, it was miserable, high turnover. People hated it. The middle group gave the top performers a run for their money.
Okay.
Right. And the reason why was the person leading that middle group didn't accept that they were average. He set the expectation that there is no reason that we as a team can't do that.
Yep.
And that expectation became the inspiration. Right. And I think that's the power here. When you set a stretch goal, when you set an expectation that helps people grow and pushes them and inspires them, that's the thing that's going to promote growth. That's the thing that's going to make people happy in their jobs, feel fulfilled because they're doing more than they thought they could. I think when you look at this research, the big takeaway is expectations that are a little bit outside your current reach are the best. And the more you can set and manage those expectations, the more your team's going to perform. And maybe that's the real answer to your question. Like, what does it take to inspire? Expectations.
I completely agree with that. Because when you've got a minimum bar and then you've got, we've got a little bit of a stretch and then a little more than that stretch, most likely people are going to hit that first level stretch goal. And then that next level up is like kind of the icing on the cake.
Yeah.
But what I have seen happen is leaders will set expectations that are too high. And so they're going for that super stretch goal that a lot of times is unrealistic. And that backfires on people because the people that they're leading see that and they're like, oh, so last year our division did $1 million in revenue, and now you're setting our goal for 5 million for next year. Like, and you're not going to bring in more people, more resources. We're not changing anything, but we're somehow through magic going to 5x what we did last year. Yeah. I think that demotivates, right? And that takes the inspiration away. So how do you help leaders to temper that? I'm a super firm believer in setting those stretch goals, but they've got to be realistic. And how do you get that overachiever in their head to say, like, let's take our foot off the gas a little bit here?
So there's a few things. One of the most simple is when you're setting expectations. So like, this is for the performance of your job. It's important to keep those a little bit smaller and more frequently measurable, right? If you're saying for the year, we need to hit this huge revenue target, that you're going to measure your progress in and everything, but like there's really only one goal and it's at the end of the year, that's a problem.
Yep.
Set smaller targets along the way. I think that helps. The other part of it is, I think it's not necessarily bad to have a really big, audacious, scary target, goal, expectation.
Agreed.
But I think that also has to come with some realistic belief from the leader that it can happen, right? If the leader walks in and is like, man, I don't have any clue. I don't think it's really possible, but this is what's been set for us. Yeah, everyone's going to just kind of be like, okay.
Yep.
And resumes are going to get updated. But I think if a leader comes in and says, look, for us to stay in business, for us to be competitive in this industry, this is what it takes. I know it's hard. I know it's scary. I'm scared of this goal too. But I think if we all sit down and work through this, there's enough talent here that we're going to figure it out. Right. And it's this combination of belief in the team and the people and valuing the people, and then the vulnerability to say, I don't have all the answers, that really starts bringing people together. There's a lot in that in terms of how do you create belonging? How do you create trust? And how do you really bring a team together? And the first step, more often than not, is that vulnerability, right? That asking for help, that belief, that idea that you don't have to have all the answers. And so many leaders feel like they're in a position where they do have to have all the answers. So that would be the next step. Go in, be vulnerable, ask for help, and figure it out, right? And then don't be afraid, if it really is impossible, to offer up something more realistic. And then the last one is to, if it's truly unrealistic, let's start lowering it. Let's figure out what it is. And let's set those goals more collaboratively rather than just a straight top-down approach.
I want to talk about this notion of vulnerability for a second, because I have seen leaders on both sides of the fence where it's like, I need to show up like the man of steel and not show vulnerability. And I think in a lot of ways that turns people off. There's a certain aspect of being, believing in yourself and having that confidence.
Yeah.
Sometimes a complete lack of vulnerability turns into cockiness. But then I've seen others where it's like they open everything up and people are like, dude, are you really here to lead? Like you embody no confidence here because you're so vulnerable. But I want to take it from the man of steel standpoint. I think that happens more than not, is leaders for some reason feel like I need to be strong. I can't show weakness. I'll often say vulnerability is not weakness, but what are some things that you've done to help those, bullheaded leaders, for lack of a better word, to say, okay, it's okay to kind of show some vulnerability here?
So Brene Brown probably has the best view on this. I'm a huge fan of hers, super smart woman. But she says something to the effect of, there's no act of courage ever that happened without vulnerability.
Agreed.
And I think a lot of those people who are walking into those situations, to some extent, are basically going like, man, I'm going to handle it. I'm going to buckle down. I'm going to be courageous. And I'm going to make it all happen. What they don't realize is that's why 40% of the C-suite is planning to quit within the year. It's that view more than anything else, in my opinion. When people realize one of the best ways you can show courage to your team and create psychological safety and all these other things is by going in and just saying, hey, here are the areas where I'm going to need some support. Now, you're also right. There has to be a belief in a leader's competence, right? So let's go back to that example of, hey, 5 million in revenue. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to happen, but here as a team, we're going to figure it out. That from one perspective, that may look like I don't know what I'm doing. I need your help to figure it out. From another perspective, and this can be a wording choice, you can say, look, I have some ideas. I'm not sure how well they're going to work, but they're a starting point. I'd love to have the discussion and hear all your thoughts on it. And I think together we can come up with something that's going to work. The inspiration there can come from, hey, I have some ideas, but the inspiration also comes from the leader as a person bringing everyone together. Mm-hmm. And I think you may find some people who will look at that and say, oh my God, JL doesn't know what he's doing. Those are the people that need some coaching. Those are the people that need to be managed in a little bit of a different way. And maybe in some cases, those are the people that need to be kind of coached to different roles, because their expectations of leadership aren't realistic. So when we think about expectations, it goes both ways. I think leaders need to set some expectations of what should you expect from leadership in this organization. So when I'm working with leaders, not only will we talk about all the tactics and things that you can do to manage the expectations, to show vulnerability in a courageous way that really inspires confidence, but we'll also talk about how do you make sure people have realistic expectations of what you are going to be doing and what the leadership's going to be doing.
Yep. So I'm a firm believer in the concept that relationships is really the foundation of your ability to lead. When you're able to establish relationships with those people, then when you do come to them with the notion of I've got some ideas, the chances of them looking at you as if you're incompetent drop dramatically, because that is just further cementing the relationship that we have. I'm
Yep.
coming to you as the leader and saying, I've got some ideas, but you're the person who's going to make this happen on the ground. So I want your ideas. I want to hear what you think. Um, as a leader, I think that's the other thing too, is that leaders have to get into their minds that they do not have to know everything about what every person's job is within an organization. They need that big picture. But once they can be humble enough to say, I don't know every single thing that JL does from 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening, day in and day out. So therefore, I need to solicit his feedback, his input. That creates a snowball effect, because once I've said to you, here's the plan, here are the expectations, how do you think that we should execute? Now, we're not executing on my idea, we're executing on your idea. The level of buy-in is that much higher. The level
Yep.
of like accountability in terms of you thinking to yourself, man, if I don't get this done, this was my idea. This
Yep.
isn't something I've been told to do. This is what I offered up, so I need to deliver and perform.
Right.
Uh, and then you as the leader have to be there to support and provide the resources for your people to execute on their idea.
And what you're saying, like, there's a lot to unpack there.
Yeah.
But I do agree. Like, so first, I think the idea of vision and the translation of that vision into action, that is leadership, right? In a lot of ways.
Right.
So there's that. You do have to do that. You have to set the vision and translate it. Two, you mentioned relationships. I think it's really common for us to talk about, hey, you have to have the relationship. But what's uncommon is really understanding what that means. Like, how do you break a relationship, the idea of a relationship, down into something actionable or something that you can manage? And I think one of the best ways to look at relationships is through the lens of belonging and trust. Does that person feel like they belong as part of the group? And does that person trust you and the group to support them, to pick up slack, to do your job, all that sort of thing? And there's a lot of good literature out there talking about the right ways to build, I won't say the right ways, good ways to build belonging and trust.
Mm-hmm.
If you've never heard of the Christmas Day truce, go look it up. World War I, it's magic. And Daniel Coyle wrote about it in his book, The Culture Code. And it's absolutely fantastic example of how you build belonging and trust. The way I like to say it is, if you can build belonging and trust between German and British soldiers in World War I, then you can do it in your office, right? Like, there's that. So you do have to do the vision and translate it. You have to build the relationships. And then I think all of that kind of comes together when you start saying this idea of expectations and this idea of vulnerability, that you now have the foundation for that, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. If you don't have the vision, if you don't have the trust and the belonging, then it doesn't matter what you do in terms of expectations. It almost doesn't matter what you do in terms of leadership. Your only recourse at that point is to fall back on just pure role authority, which isn't a healthy approach anyways, and has all sorts of risks as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say that is absolutely your last line of defense, is to
Right.
use your positional authority to get people to do something.
Right.
Like, if you can't inspire, if you can't motivate your people through conversation, through coming to a common ground, then you're probably not meant to be a leader.
Right.
You shouldn't be in that role. If it's like, I'm the boss, you're not the boss, so therefore let's do what I say.
Or at the very least, you need some help developing the skills to be a leader. I think
Yeah.
leadership is one of those roles people get shoved into. It's the Peter principle. You're promoted to your highest level of incompetence. No training, nothing to support you as a leader, especially early leaders. So I do think a lot of times it's rare for me to find someone in a leadership role that absolutely cannot be there if they want to be there. Anyone can develop the skills, the emotional intelligence, all that to do the job. But I do think you're right. A lot of people get there and realize the only thing I know how to do is say, I'm the boss. You need to do what I say.
Right.
And that creates this split between autonomous individuals, which, problem solving individuals that we want, and this, what we would call agentic response, which is more of the, since you told me, I'm going to do the bare minimum to meet the standards of the task and nothing else. Right. Basically that robot mode.
Yeah.
So you got to move away from that role of authority, that positional authority.
It's funny that you say that, because I will often talk about how leadership is not reserved for business or in an organization. Leadership is around us all the time. It's the way that we lead ourselves. It's the way that we are within our group of friends. But a great example of that is your relationship with your kids, right? It's easy for me as a dad, right? I've got 3 teenage sons. So it's easy for me as the dad to say, all right, boys, it's springtime. We're doing the spring cleanup outside.
Yeah.
And they're going to bitch and moan because there are 3 teenagers.
Yeah.
And if I just use that authority of me being dad, then the bare minimum is happening.
Yep.
But if I try to gamify it, if I try to hey, let's divide and conquer, right? There are 4 of us here. It's not just you 3 guys. There are 4 of us, and we need to get all this stuff done. Who's best at doing what? And let's come up with a time frame. Let's come up with a reward. If we get it done sooner, we're heading to the arcade, or we're going to get pizza, whatever. But that's when they'll go above and beyond. But if I say, hey, look, boys, I expect you Saturday to do this, man, you're getting the bare minimum.
Yeah. Well, and I laugh because I have a habit of saying at least 50%, probably closer to 75% of everything I know about leadership came from parenting books. The parallels, the overlap, it's all there. And I know, like, listening to that story, it's really familiar. I have a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old, so they both think they're teenagers. That's the way it goes. But I think, like, when you look at that situation, one, start by saying, you're reminding them, hey, we're a family, we help each other. Right. Inspire that belonging, that feeling of belonging first. Then there's this idea that hey, we do the hard things so we can do the fun things. Right. This idea that the sacrifice is worth the reward. Discipline, almost by definition, is doing the things you don't want to do so you can get the result you really want. Right. So there's that belonging, then understanding, helping them kind of balance the sacrifice to reward. And then 3, leaning, like you said, leaning into their strengths, playing to their strengths, showing them how this is growth. Like, hell, if you've got a kid that's in football, you're like, hey, think about this as conditioning. They did a study with cleaning staff in hotels a while back. And I'm going to butcher this because it's been a while since I've talked about it. So what they did is, with a certain portion of the cleaning staff, they talked to them about all the health benefits of being up and walking, and how the activities they were doing could be considered exercise and could help them lose weight and all this other stuff. And with the other group, they didn't really do that. I can't remember what they did, but it was the control group, right?
Okay.
And what they found was the group that had the talk, they lost weight. They felt better about their job. They were more energetic. They were faster, right? So they saw the results. They saw the benefit. They were inspired, right? And that's cleaning people's hotel rooms, which I've never done it, but I can't imagine it's fun, right? It's probably about as fun as raking leaves.
Right.
So when you look at the way we talk to people, like, that matters. perspective matters. And the more you can find the perspective that is going to be the most useful to you or the person you're working with in that situation, the better. It still has to be realistic, right? But it's kind of like a football game, right? I'm a KU fan, and when I was in college, it was, the rivalry was K-State. I guarantee you, every KU K-State game I watched with some of my friends from K-State, when there was a flag, it was obviously K-State's fault, and I don't know how in the world they thought it could have ever been on KU. But we saw the same thing happen, right? It's the same thing here. Those perspectives are equally valid. We saw the same thing. Different opinions came out of it. So I think managing perspective is another big part of this.
It is. And so I want to tie that perspective back to inspiration, right? How do we use perspectives to inspire people to be the best that they can be? Whether it's a leader being the best leader they could be, or a leader translating that to their team so that they could be the best that they can be.
I think when you're looking at those perspectives, what you want to find are the things that really highlight the value of the person, right? So we've talked about playing to strengths and all those different things. So if I'm talking to you, Chris, I need you to go complete this task and I need it done by Monday. That's one way I could do it. It's very authoritarian, probably not gonna enjoy that. Whereas if I come to you and say, hey, here's this issue that we have. I think if you do this, it'll probably solve it. But I also know you probably have some other ideas that might even be better. I really just need a resolution by Monday. If you need my help, I'm here. But I have the utmost faith in your ability to handle this. Let me know what I can do, right? Mm-hmm. One, that's showing you are a valued part of the team because I trust you to solve a problem. Two, I'm encouraging you to be autonomous. So when you think about motivation, Daniel Pink talks about purpose, autonomy, and mastery, right? And this is kind of ticking in all those boxes. So I'm encouraging you to be autonomous. Three, I'm encouraging you to stretch, right? So that goes into that mastery again. So I think when we set up a request, we can build the perspective that, hey, Chris, you are able to solve problems. I believe in you, and what you're doing is important to this team. And that is a perspective that's going to inspire people, right? Even if it's not necessarily a sexy, like, we're going to feed the hungry, we're going to put roofs over everyone's head, save every orphan child. It kind of ticks those boxes for fulfillment that kind of helps us do more than we ever thought we could. So maybe this is good. Have you ever heard of Liz Wiseman? She wrote a book called Multipliers. She did a lot of really awesome research, and she put leaders on a scale. At one end was diminishers, and at the other end was multipliers. Okay. And we're talking about this kind of perspective setting, this motivation. That's a very big multiplying behavior. And what she found was diminishers, the difference in the productivity of teams under diminishers versus multipliers was about 2.1 times.
Whoa.
Yeah. Okay. So you get almost twice as much out of your team by living at this end of the spectrum. So when for instance, we're talking about coaching and we're trying to say, look, here's the value of developing your leadership, of coaching your leaders and helping them do that. If we move you towards the multiplying side of things, you could potentially double your growth without hiring anyone. What's that worth to you?
Yeah.
We talked earlier about turnover. So let's just take the 40% of the C-suite is looking to quit. If we help them find better ways to motivate and be motivated and they stay, that's a huge savings. So there's a few different HR organizations. I think the SHRM is one of them. There's a couple others that have done studies, and time over time, they find that it costs about 30% of a person's salary to replace them.
Yes.
So if you have a C-level executive that's earning $200,000 a year and you help them stay, that's $60,000. Yeah. So the return on investment for coaching, for helping people find the right perspective, because that's a lot of what coaching is right. Huge. Everywhere you look, you'll see anywhere from 5 to 7 8 times return on investment for coaching for these types of reasons. And that's not even accounting for some of the more intangible stuff that kind of goes around employee engagement and things like that.
You know, when I think about motivation and inspiration, they're kind of soft topics.
Yeah.
And I know for me, when I was young, and I'll say like when I was a young idiot, I saw this stuff as like, emotional intelligence, that's like touchy-feely.
Yeah.
This motivation, inspiration, touchy-feely. Like I've got my own motivation, my own inspiration that drives me. I shouldn't have to be providing that to the people that I lead. And that was a very narrow way of thinking about leadership. And it was, in retrospect, the wrong way of
Yeah.
thinking about leadership. So I find myself often working with people who feel the same way. And, I try to draw things out of them to help them see the benefits of increasing your EQ, right?
Ah,
There are so many benefits to being more emotionally intelligent.
yeah.
There, when you motivate others and you inspire others, it makes your life easier. Um, so, what are some of the things that, if you were talking to a young idiot like I used to be,
And me.
it, a lot of times I blame it on being Gen X because it's like we were just left to our own resources and drink from the garden hose and things like that. So, coming up, it was like, no, just be tough like I am and you'll be fine. Um, but when you're talking to those leaders
Yeah.
that were like us when we were younger, how do you get the importance across to them of this, how much those soft skills matter and that they're not
Yeah.
just fluff?
I think you always start with what's in it for them, right? There's all these benefits for the organization, benefits for other people, and you kind of hit on this a little bit. But the reality is, most people want to hear. You're going to get the most attention. Maybe let's put it that way, by starting with what's in it for me. So when we look at things like emotional intelligence, the statistics are pretty clear. They've done the research. When you look at the people who are ranked as top performers within an organization, 90% of those people are considered emotionally intelligent. And I'm not sure exactly on how they draw that line. I'd have to go back to the research. So there's that. You can also look at the fact that in the research they've done, that your job performance, like how successful you are at accomplishing the tasks in front of you, especially as a leader, 58% of your job performance is attributed to your emotional intelligence. So if you want to perform better, get more done, provide more value to your organization, emotional intelligence is the way to go. If you want to get really plain and simple, people who are ranked emotionally intelligent, again, not quite sure where they draw that line. There's a lot of different ways to talk about it, but on average, they earn right around $30,000 more a year than people who are less emotionally intelligent. And I think starting there gets people's attention, right? When you start talking about building emotional intelligence within an organization, that conversation shifts a little bit. And I'm big on numbers because those are the things that are going to be able to drive spending, right? And the reality is, if you don't invest in these behaviors and these mindsets, they aren't going to take hold. So to build that business case, you do need to talk about how are you going to justify the expense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, again, you can start talking about retention. You can start talking about productivity, Liz Wiseman's research. You can start talking about all that sort of stuff that really can say, hey, let's look at this. Let's start this program. Let's see how it goes. And let's look at what happens to your retention numbers. And I guarantee you, if you know what you're doing and you're talking to the idea of emotional intelligence and you're really increasing that within an organization, you're going to see retention improve.
Yes.
And that's going to happen within 6 months, 12 months on the outside. Hell, a lot of times you'll see it within 3 months. If you truly go in and work with some leaders that are really struggling and up their emotional intelligence, their turnover is going to drop really, really fast. And those are the types of things that will gain the buy-in. And then once you kind of have their attention, you can start tying it more and more to their values, right? to who they are as a person, to the impact they want to have on the world, and the legacy they want to leave behind. But the reality is, especially senior leadership, they're so busy, they're so overwhelmed that unless you can get their attention right away, you're going to miss them, right? You're going to lose them. And it's rare that you have that person that has the self-awareness to go, ooh, I'm not super emotionally intelligent, and I see the value in that. They did a study, this woman, Dr. Tasha Urich, I'm trying to remember when it was. I won't remember now, but what she found is when you look at self-awareness, so this idea of I truly have an accurate model representation of who I am as a person and how I'm interacting with the world and how people perceive me, there's around 10, maybe 15% of people that would be considered self-aware.
Wow. Only 10 to 15%?
The reality, so the problem is there are so many biases that get in the way, right? So let's just talk about one, actor-observer bias, right? If you've ever heard of it, you'll know what I'm talking about. It's this concept that when I'm late for work, man, it was an act of God. Every light was red. Someone cut me off. I did everything humanly possible, Chris, to get in here on time. It was not going to happen. I even left 20 minutes early and I'm still late. I gave myself every benefit of the doubt. But when you're late, now Chris is just lazy.
Right. Yes.
Right. When I'm the observer, I tend to give very simple and often negative motivations to the behavior, to the results. When I'm the actor, I give myself a nice, rich story that justifies what I did. And that's one bias that just gets horribly in the way of our own self-awareness. And until we find some ways to kind of see through those, it's really hard for us to get an accurate representation of kind of who we are and the impact we're having. That's one of the reasons I'm a firm believer in 360 feedback, right? Whether it's assessment, however you do it, get that 360 feedback and make sure you are actually listening to the results. Because again, we have a whole bunch of other biases where we want to listen to the things that confirm the image of who we think we are and ignore the things that don't. So you really have to sit down and dig in to that 360 feedback and be curious and take it in and adjust to it.
The 360s are such a powerful tool when the person being evaluated is open-minded. And like you said, they can dismiss, I don't really want to hear that about myself, or I don't believe that about myself. So therefore I'm going to discount what I'm hearing, even though I've just heard it from 4 different people. I'm still going to discount it. I'll say this for you leaders out there who are watching and listening. If you commit to doing a 360, you have to commit to being open-minded about it. You can set rules around how information is delivered, questions that you're able to ask for clarification, things like that. But you've got to commit to being willing to hear things that you don't want to hear and understanding that there's going to be some truth to them. And that's where you're going to see a path to growth, is when you open up your mind and say, you know what? These people have my best interest in heart, because the better I am as a leader, the better they're going to perform as my team. So I didn't invite them here to be malicious. I invited them here to help me get better. That's where it kind of opens things up, and a leader takes stock in what's being said to them, even if it's something that they don't want to hear or even necessarily agree with.
Well, and I will say 360 assessments, they're super easy to get wrong.
And
I think a lot of companies don't spend a lot of time thinking about them. The best ones I see out there on the market are the ones that not only gather the input, but give you a little statistical analysis. So one of my favorites, Leadership Circle Profile. Fantastic assessment. When they show you the results, you do get all the feedback, like this is what people wrote, right? But you also get this really nice diagram that says, okay, we've had hundreds of thousands of people who have taken the Leadership Circle Profile assessment over the years. Based on that, in these categories, this is how you compare. Right? And this is how these things all relate to each other. And this is how they correlate to your effectiveness as a leader, your ability to get things done and deliver value. It's a really clear story that basically, if you took it, I could sit down with you and say, okay, Chris, based on this, you're better than 75% of the leaders out there in these ways. And you're in about the 20th percentile in these ways. So look at it this way. If you bump this up a little bit, your effectiveness will skyrocket, right? So if all you're doing is getting the feedback in terms of words, right, that's still good. But like you said, it's very easy to ignore. And in all honesty, it's hard to parse that out and understand what you should focus on and what you shouldn't. But when you go into some of these assessments that really give you that more holistic and statistical view, one, it's a lot harder to ignore. It hits home a lot harder and a lot better. And then two, you can be much more targeted because it's a system, right? It really does tell you these are how like your creative tendencies and your active tendencies are mapping together, and this is how they fit into your ability to perform as a leader. It gives you a much better and measurable path forward to plan your growth. So I think definitely look at 360 assessments, but pick a good one because it's too easy to pick a bad one. And if your HR department says, oh, no, we built our own, you might want to question that a little bit and see if there's some options to do something that can go in a little bit more depth.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. JL, we've been talking for a while now, and I know I could sit here and continue talking about leadership and how to inspire others. But you're a busy guy. I'm busy as well. So, we like to keep these things to just about under an hour.
Yep.
I've got one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up and, let everyone else get back to their day as well.
Yeah.
Final question, something that I'd like to ask everybody is, what is your leadership philosophy?
So given that we cheated and you told me this was coming, I did prepare a little bit. And I think one thing to think about when you talk about leadership philosophies, every leader should have one. It has to be simple. It has to be actionable, but it also has to have like that double click depth, right? Mm-hmm. So with all that in mind, mine is really simple. I think every leader, when they approach leadership, should be cultivating a human-centered approach. And that should be encapsulated in a lean and agile mindset, right? And I mean that in terms of the capital A agile as well as the lower K agile, right? Where not only do we have to realize everything we do is based on people. That's where the human-centered comes from. But everything we do has to be able to change and adapt to the culture, the environment around us, the industry. And we have to be able to do that in a way that allows us to continuously improve while continuously growing our people, all those sorts of things. So my simple one is cultivate a human-centered approach with a solid, lean, and agile mindset. And that's really it.
Nice. I like it. The human-centered approach, so important for a leadership standpoint, and applying that lean and agile approach to things, I think helps you to gauge progress in small bite-sized pieces and adjust without it having to go too long, and realizing that a mistake was made at step 3 and now we're at step 12 and now I've got to go back and redo all this stuff. So combining those frameworks, I think, is brilliant from a leadership philosophy standpoint.
And I do think it's important to mention, I am very deliberate when I say mindset versus framework, because I'm not saying go out there and adopt Scrum, Kanban, SAFe, or anything like that. I'm saying look at the principles and let those guide you. I think if you do that, you're going to come up with the right solution for you and your organization. If you just pick up a framework, that's not going to work as well for you. But yeah, those agile mindsets, those lean mindsets, those are pretty key.
Agreed. Awesome. JL, any final thoughts before we wrap it up for today?
I'm just really grateful for you having me on here. This has been a lot of fun. If anyone is interested, we post a lot about this type of content on LinkedIn. So I'd love it if people would be interested in following me. We do have our articles posted on centered.work. That's our website. You can sign up for the monthly email of articles to get informed and involved. And then, yeah, I'd love to be engaged with anyone who's interested. So feel free to reach out and start a conversation.
Awesome. And For anyone who's listening or watching, I will post all those links in the show notes. So, scroll down, grab those links, get in touch with JL, see what he's putting out there on the interwebs and on social media, and, take your leadership to the next level. So, JL, Heather, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciated the conversation. I know that whoever's watching or listening is going to get something out of it. And for everybody who's watching and listening, if you did get something out of this, please share it with other people. Please subscribe to the channel so that you're not missing other content. This leadership content and these interviews happen on a regular basis. So subscribe so you don't miss it. Like it so that it boosts the algorithms and more people get exposed to this, because the whole goal of this show is to help people to be the best leaders that they can be. That's why I bring these interesting guests on to share their perspective and share their lessons, so that we're getting so much more leadership content out there to the world. So if you like the show, please subscribe, please share it, please like it, and I will catch you on the next one. And until then, lead on.